So now that we've established our different areas for our header, our nav, our A-side article, and our footer, we're going to go ahead and start actually creating the look of them, right? Now, what I think is important to note is whenever you're looking at a website, you want to know, how does it function? Does it have a static width and height? Like that means that it doesn't adjust. It's always going to be the same size. So let's check this out. So here's our page, and you can see that as this page gets wider, the header, nav, article, and A-side and the footer all expand in width. So that must mean that they don't have a static width like 800 pixels, which means that they would never change. Instead, they're based off of how wide the browser window is. And this is great for like when you're on a phone, because the phone is really skinny, or an iPad or a tablet, or on a computer screen. Really having it adjust is a great feature and responsive design. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create some responsiveness. Now notice they aren't getting taller as the page gets taller, so that means that they aren't responsive in height, just in width, which is usually how things work because we're all used to scrolling down, right? But we don't really scroll across a lot. So if we make it responsive to the width, we are good to scroll down, but we don't have to be scrolling across as much. So we're going to go ahead and start creating that. We're also giving these colors so we can see them. Again, normally you wouldn't have a lot of color in the background, only to draw attention to certain things. Usually you see it on like your header and your nav and usually your footer, but normally in the middle there, that A-side and article pulls from the background color, which we haven't really talked about how to do the background color yet, but we'll get there and how you can adjust it. So what we're going to do is start making these look different. They all exist and they all exist in the right order. So we're going to go ahead and go to our CSS and start stylizing them. So I'm going to start with the background color of the header and the height and the width. So to bring the header down, we're going to go ahead and call it by its name of header. And then we're going to open up our curly brackets. Now we know how to do a background color with a name like red, right? And we make it pop up, and notice how it goes all the way over the edge. And again, block elements are as wide as the pages by default settings. However, we can actually do a background color with a little bit different pieces here. We can do a background color with a bunch of different color options. So I want to talk about how this background color is made again and how we can bring in those, but that's going to be in the next video. So keep in mind that we're coming back to this background color. Let's talk about the height and the width here. So the height is going to be in pixels. It's static. We are, again, measuring in pixels because we are on screens, and screens are measured in pixels. Remember, pixels are little tiny squares that our computer has available, and it takes all those little tiny squares and it puts them right next to each other, and they all show a color of light. And so those pixels all together then create what our screen is seeing. So we can create 100 pixels high, and that's 100 little tiny boxes all together. And then we're going to create a width. Now, normally we would create a width of like, let's say 800 pixels, right? But when we create a width of 800 pixels, notice that when I reach 800 pixels, it doesn't adjust as the page gets bigger or the page gets smaller. It's going to stay at 800 no matter how wide this is. So instead of doing 800 pixels, we can do a percentage. A percentage is going to allow it to determine how big is the page and then determine a percentage of that. So if I do like 80% here instead of 800 pixels, you'll notice it will find the width of the page and about 20% of the page won't be filled. As the page gets wider, the header gets wider, taking up 80% of the page. So you can do that here for your header, and then we can go ahead and do the same thing for our nav. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in my nav here. And again, we're doing the wrong colors because we're going to come back to background color here in a minute in the next video to talk about color. But I'm going to go ahead and put green here for just for now. And we're going to do a height of 35 pixels, and we want it to be stacked right underneath that header. So the question would be, what would be the width at that point? The same as the header, right? So 80%. And they'll adjust together. So as the page gets bigger, they will both adjust automatically with that page. All right, so we're going to go ahead and save it here. And in the next video, we're going to come back and talk about how can we really measure color instead of just using the names that are available for this.